Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Just a minute, if Kevin, you want to start the streaming?
It has started.
It has started. So I'll hand this to Tony and Allison to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Welcome, everybody. In a few minutes, I think we'll go around and do some introductions. I believe I know almost all of you. I'm Tony Lathrop, and I've chaired this advisory committee since its inception. And I am a member of the North Carolina Board of Transportation. And I guess I'm really here because I chaired the Planning Commission for 3 years and became involved in this process at that point. So I've been with the UDO for, 5 years plus. So I want to, as always, appreciate everybody for being here and for all that you're doing with this process. And we've been conducting this process for a long, long time, since well before the comprehensive plan process was started. And continue to be a firm believer that process is key to a successful result. And this process has continued to be very inclusive, very transparent, and very thorough and rigorous. And I want to commend all of you all and the staff for that. And I think that a good result is a product of a good process. And so the engagement, I think, is critical to the success of this endeavor. So I thank all of you very much. Allison, you ready?
Yep. Thanks, Tony. I appreciate your leadership. So I believe I know most everyone or everyone on the call. I'm Allison Craig. I'm the Deputy Planning Director. Really excited to have you all here today. I'm pretty sure everyone is aware that the comprehensive plan was adopted by City Council on Monday night. And the UDO is one of the key ways that we implement the vision and values of the comprehensive plan. So all eyes are on the UDO now. And so this work that y'all have been involved in, continues to be very important, and certainly in the spotlight as we move forward. So as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for your feedback. And I look forward to a great discussion today. We have the second part of our SSI work here today. And I know we'll do some introductions because we have our CDOT friends on the call today. So if you're able to be on camera, that would be great, just so that we can put a face with the name. But we'll have these chapters, and then there'll be some other things, administration, some other TOD work that will come later in the summer. Right now, we are anticipating that the first public draft for the UDO will be late summer, early fall. So really just trying to work through some of this material with this group. This is one of the reasons why we have you all here, is to bounce early ideas off and get feedback, and then work with our consultants to create that draft language. So again, thank you for your work. I wanted to also mention too that we, as the governor, opens the state up and we're starting to return back to some kind of normalcy, that we will begin some phased approach coming back into the office later this summer, so late July. I'm really not anticipating the government building being open to the public until September 1. So the committees that we have will remain virtual then, but we will send out a survey probably before the next meeting or in conjunction with the next meeting, just to see what your thoughts are on continuing a hybrid model. For this group, I think there is some efficiency to being able to take the commute out of coming to the government center, but we also know that there's value in in-person discussions. So just want to hear your feedback on what that looks like starting in the fall. So stay tuned for that, and we'll send something via email before the next meeting. And with that, just wanted to say thank you again for your participation, and I will turn things over to Alan and Laura.
Thanks, Allison. We're going to go through, as we do every few meetings, as Tony mentioned and ask you guys to just briefly introduce yourself, what organization you are representing. And to do this, to make this easiest, I'm just going to call each of your names and ask you to unmute yourself and again, introduce yourself and your organization. And we've got, I know, a lot of staff on as well as a lot of OSM members, and our consultants want to make sure everyone knows each other. So I'm going to start my upper left-hand corner on my screen with Kevin May.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Kevin May, Charlotte Planning. I'm on the UDO team, and I'm currently spearheading and coordinating the SSI efforts as part of the UDO.
Alan Goodwin.
Good morning, Alan Goodwin. I'm the Deputy Project Manager for the UDO.
Rista Strungis.
Hi, I'm Marissa Strungis from Camiros, the consultant hired to help with the UDO.
And we have a room with 3 CDOT staff in there. If you guys could introduce yourselves.
I am Joanna Quinn, CDOT Planning and Design Division Manager.
Felix Obregon. I'm part of the CDOT Planning and Design Division, working on the UDO.
And I'm Julian Burton, Transportation Planner with CDOT Planning and Design, also on the SSI core team working on the UDO.
Lorena.
Hi, I'm Lorena Green. I work in the planning department. I support the UDO team in other marketing efforts.
Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Newsom. I'm a transportation planner in CDOT's Planning and Design Division, working on the UDO effort with planning, and I'm really not sitting in the dark. I just can't get the lighting right. So,
Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Weaver. I'm the subdivision administrator in the planning department.
Eric.
Eric Severell with St. Charlotte.
Sandy.
Did I hear my name?
Yes. Sorry.
I'm Sandra Montgomery. I work in the planning department, and I'm on the UDO team working specifically on the administration chapter.
Walter. Walter, you're muted. Walter Fields.
Sorry. I'm Walter Fields. I'm a city planner, and I'm here as a participant and witness to this process.
Warren.
Hello, Warren Cooksey, former vice chairman of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission years ago, resident of South Charlotte, and I'm here because Councilmember Driggs brought this opportunity to my attention. Happy to be a part.
Derek Dittner. Derek, you're unmuted. Is anyone hearing Derek?
No.
I guess we'll move on, and at the end, Derek, raise your hand to see if we can hear you. Dick Winters.
Retired public health employee and now volunteer with Trips for Kids Charlotte.
Matt Langston.
I'm a landscape architect with Landworks Design Group, and in private practice and sort of a practitioner participant.
David Walters.
Hi, I'm an architect and urban designer, retired from UNC Charlotte, where I ran the urban design program, and I realized I had a birthday recently. I've been doing this in planning and development for 50 years now. Does it show?
Chris, Jeanette.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Jeanette. I'm a principal urban designer and landscape architect with Camiros. We're the UDO consultant.
Teresa McDonald.
I am Teresa McDonald with Dorada Statesville Road Community Organization.
Richard Seltrick.
Hey, Rick Saltrick, former city engineer down in Miami Beach, and then with the Stormwater Advisory Committee.
Brent Gilroy?
Yep, there we go. Brent Gilroy, semi-retired public affairs consultant, and I live in Stonehaven in Southeast Charlotte, member of the committee since it started.
Yolanda?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yolanda Jones. I am with the Planning Department. I'll be assisting with UDO on the communications and community engagement side.
Chad?
Hey, I'm Chad Spencer. I'm the zoning administrator.
Rebecca?
I'm Rebecca Fant. I'm an architect and I represent the South Park Association of Neighborhoods, SPAN for short.
Jim Merrifield.
Yes, Jim Merrifield with MPV Properties, a commercial real estate developer representing the commercial interests in this process.
Bobby Sullivan?
Bobby, we heard, well, we saw you talking, but we didn't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm Bobby Sullivan, an attorney with the City Attorney's Office.
Robbie?
Robbie Zink with Stormwater Services Land Development Program Manager.
Great. Okay, people are moving around on my screen. There, Derek. There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I had to switch computers. Derek Dittner, I'm an attorney and I represent the Barclay Downs Homeowners Association in South Park.
Nate Doolittle.
Morning, Nate Doolittle with Land Design, civil engineer.
Mariah?
Hi. Oh,
Did we just lose Mariah?
hi, everyone. My name is Mariah Wozniak. Oh, I must be behind. Hi, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm an intern on the UDO team, but I'll be joining full time in a couple weeks.
Kyle?
Hello, sorry, I'm coming at you from the Low Tuck area now. That's what apparently they're calling it because we're doing work on our house. But Kyle Lupke, and I am representing Enderley Park and District 3 and was engaged in this by Councilmember Wellington.
Jennifer Wasp.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Wasp, and I represent the Medford Acres and Eastway Sheffield neighborhoods.
Lisa McCarter.
Hi, I'm Lisa McCarter, and I'm with Zoning Administration.
Is Gretchen Flores on? I don't know if you can hear us. Looks like you're connecting to audio. You have to come back. Okay, Ellen Citarella.
Hi, I'm Ellen Citarella. I apologize for not having my video on. I'm recovering from hip replacement surgery. I represent the Dilworth Community Association.
Jason.
Hi, good morning. Jason Jarrett. I'm one of the representatives for Charlotte for the UDO.
Thank you. Dave Wiggins.
This is Dave Wiggins. I'm with the Steel Creek Residents Association.
Brittany Lenz.
Hey everyone, Brittany Lenz, land use attorney with the law firm of Alexander Ricks and resident of the Freedom Park neighborhood.
Rob Nanfeld.
Hi, this is Rob Nanfeld with Rebic. I'll be on video in just a few minutes.
Melissa Gaston.
Hi, Melissa Gaston with the North End Community Coalition.
Gerard iPhone.
Hey, Gerard Jones, Real Estate Development Associate with Dream Key Partners and resident of Northwood Park off the Bettysford Road corridor.
Tari, I see you on.
Yes, hello, Tari Hagler Gray, City Attorney's Office.
And I'm going to say, I think that's everyone, but if I've missed anyone, if you can just unmute and introduce yourself. Then I think we got everyone. Alan, you're going to go through a quick intro where we're going and.
Yes, thank you, Laura. Hopefully everybody will be able to see the slides on your screen now. So as Allison mentioned, today's topic will be part 2 of the subdivision streets and infrastructure conversation. And we are live recording today's meeting on our YouTube channel, and we will also post a video recording of the meeting to the YouTube channel and also to the charlotteudo.org website, as we usually do. And as we've been doing, feel free as we go through today's slides, and they're being narrated by staff members, as questions or comments arise, please feel free to put them into the chat feature of Zoom, and staff will try to answer them as best we're able to live time. And there will be a couple of times during the presentation where we'll stop and catch up with comments and questions and open up microphones and have a conversation if that's what we need to do. So at this point, I'd like to turn it to Kevin May to get started.
Thank you, Ellen. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Again, Kevin May, UDO team leading the SSI effort. This first couple of slides during our presentation today is a little bit of a recap as to some of the principles that we covered during our first meeting a couple weeks ago. So to recap, what is SSI? SSI for us, we're talking about subdivisions, and those can be the subject tos, the subdivision regulations, or the not subject tos. Streets and what comprises of streets. We're talking about the network, block design, curb and gutter, also the amenity zone planning strips, and infrastructure. And while it again is all infrastructure, there are other pieces of infrastructure that we're also talking about, such as drainage, water supply, and sewer. This should be a familiar slide to everybody, and Allison touched on it at the beginning. This shows the relationship between the comp plan and our efforts on the UDO project. The comp plan really sets forth the vision and the policies and the plan that provide that vision, and the UDO is the implementation tool and how we implement that vision through the community with regulations and ordinances. Here you'll see a little bit of the policy context that the comprehensive plan, which again was adopted on Monday, sets out with regard to some very overarching or general principles for the SSI that really kind of frame our efforts as we go forward in trying to develop this chapter. Coming up in a little bit, we'll touch on specifically some very topical policy references that the comp plan has captured with regard to really exploring and building out network, which we're going to talk about today. Again, this is just a little bit charting the road ahead today. As I said, a little bit of a brief recap. We're going to start to shift our focus a little bit. The last time out, we focused a lot on a little bit of a primer, kind of getting everybody up to speed so everybody could look at these concepts through the same lens. We talked and explored about common concepts and common terminology that weave their way through a lot of the efforts and the concepts that we're going to explore going forward. Specifically today, we're going to be looking at concepts for network and connectivity, standards for new streets, and touching briefly, time permitting, on other infrastructure. And then we've got our third engagement coming up in a few weeks on July 8th, which will continue to drill down deeper into some SSI concepts. Again, this slide really just reiterates a little bit of what I touched on, is kind of bringing into focus, starting today, a little bit of a more drilled down and dialed in focus on the new content. Of course, as much like all of our UDO efforts, we've got kind of 3 levels of efforts that we're undergoing as we try to put this UDO together. And one's kind of a reorganization of our standards and ordinances. And then as we reorganize those, we're also looking to refine them making them so they're a little bit easier to administer and better for everybody. And then, of course, just as by the nature of some of the age of our standards or our regulations, we'll also be exploring new content as well. So I spoke a little bit earlier about some of the policy context that the comp plan had set out with regard to really all of the SSI efforts. But when we start to talk about today's topic, which centers around street network and connectivity, there's two very important policies in the approved and adopted comp plan that really speak to what we're going to be talking about today. And one is policy 5.21, which talks about creating new network connections, especially when you think of our historically disconnected street grid, as it alludes to in the last piece of that. And then also policy 5.6, which is talking about not only establishing our street networks, but also expanding upon them so that we have more abilities for efficient transportation choices and routes. So why is street network important? And I think it's probably important for many of the reasons that a lot of us already think it's very important. It supports a thriving community through growth and development. It connects the types of places that we're in, whether that be live, work, and play, which should be very familiar place type principles at this point, being that these are kind of the places that have guided the formulation of the comp plan. It also, and I touched on this, it creates route and mode choices, and it supports efficient public services. And a good way to think about that is it supports efficient public services for fire or emergency services or for other services such as solid waste. Most of the network we achieve today is created through development. And that development usually comes through a variety of streets. And this may be familiar to you as a slide that you saw during our first walkthrough a couple of weeks ago. And this just really captures that we have a variety of streets that make up our network through the city. And they range on the spectrum of how they're accessed, the speed and the volume that they're geared for, and what their orientation is, whether they're more auto-oriented or they're more pedestrian-oriented. And so with that, I'd like to turn that over to somebody who was introduced initially to take you through the next couple of slides as we explore network, and that is Tracy Newsom with the transportation planner with CDOT. Tracy?
Thanks, Kevin. And Kevin walked through, again, I appreciate providing a little bit more of the background and reminding people of the importance of street network. So you've done that. You've reminded people that there are a lot of different types of streets that make up that network. So what we're going to do now is Josh and I are going to walk through kind of what are the new concepts for new streets. We'll talk about existing streets next time, but this is concepts for requirements for new streets moving forward. We'll also walk through it from the standpoint of looking at limited access and arterials separately from looking at local streets and collectors, because the processes are a little bit different. Even though they make up important parts of the network, the processes are a little different. Just a quick reminder, when we use the term limited access in the language that we're using, we're talking about freeways and interstates. When we use the term arterials, we're talking about parkways, boulevards, avenues, and main streets. You'll see that terminology in those classifications. Parkway is a little bit of a hybrid in the sense that while it is categorized as an arterial, it has a lot of characteristics similar to a limited access type of road. Just a quick reminder, these streets are shown on the Charlotte Streets map, which we talked a little bit about last time. We'll talk a little bit more about next time as well, but that's just a reminder that that's where you find that information. The other thing that's important from the standpoint of understanding the requirements for these types of streets is that because of the nature of them, that they're part of the broader network. They serve not only direct access, but also longer distance travel. These streets are typically constructed by the public. So the city or the state or some combination thereof. As many of you in the room know, sometimes there's also a partnership because there's a reason why there would be a partnership that the private side is also involved in these. But for the most part, these are constructed by the public. What we're going to do is show you, as we go through this, some concepts for this that are, some are new, some are similar to what's already done, and then some are pretty much the same as what's already done. So next slide, please. So the first concept shown here is a new concept for this approach in the UDO, and that's to put a reservation, an 18-month reservation in place of right-of-way for arterials and limited access roadways. That reservation would start at the land development, at the time of land development approval. This is different enough that we are still working through a lot of the details on this about what happens during that 18 months, what happens after that 18 months. And there's, this is a challenge. This is a different approach for the public in terms of providing these types of streets. So we're continuing to work through the details on that. The next topic, or the next concept, is not a new concept. That's something that we have done all along. You're probably very familiar with this, that in some cases it makes sense where there is an arterial or some right-of-way for arterial or an expected arterial. There may be a need from a network perspective, from a network requirement perspective, or from an access and alignment perspective, that in some cases a collector or a local street may be actually constructed within the right-of-way of that future arterial. And in that case, there would be dedication of right-of-way rather than reservation of right-of-way. And that's not different. That's not a new concept, but that would still remain. We know that the challenge of all of this is that the network is important, and we need to continue to find ways to ensure that we're getting that network and supporting development and doing it in a beneficial way. The third concept on here is not a new concept, but it's a little bit different configuration of an existing concept. And that really is that, there are cases and times when it makes sense that dedication would occur for these types of streets rather than reservation. And so the way it works now is that there are certain types of bonuses or certain types of things that can happen that if the right-of-way is dedicated, that you may maintain the same density, for example. So there's stuff in the ordinance now that allows this kind of an incentive to create dedication. We're looking for a similar type of approach in the UDO moving forward. One concept is the idea that maybe lot size could be reduced if dedication of the right-of-way for an arterial, for example, if the right-of-way for the arterial is dedicated. We're continuing to look at other types of bonuses that would make sense for this as well. Next, please. Another new concept is for arterials has to do with main streets. As we said, main streets are shown on the streets map. The existing main streets are shown on the streets map. There are not a lot of them on the streets map. There's a process. There are processes in place where new main streets may be identified through a planning process, for example, but for the most part, they're on there. But we're proposing a new concept that a developer may actually propose a new main street, depending on the place type. So the developer may want a main street as part of their development, and there would be conditions for proposing a new main street. It would need to be the appropriate place type. So a main street, reminder, a main street is a very pedestrian-oriented street. It has pretty specific design details to it. And so basically most of the place types that would have a little bit more intensity of development, a little bit more pedestrian orientation or need for that pedestrian orientation, that would be the type of place type that it would be appropriate for. We'd want it to connect directly to an arterial. We wouldn't want a lot of main streets kind of sitting out in the middle, disconnected out in the middle of a lot of local street network. So there would be a need to connect. And this says it would run for at least 3 blocks in length. The point with a main street is you don't want to have it too short. You don't necessarily want it to be a mile or a mile and a half either. So there's a sweet spot in terms of the length of that main street, what we would expect that to be. So in this case, if the conditions are met and the developer proposes a new main street, the conditions are met, then the developer would construct a street and dedicate the right-of-way. And then there would be a process in place to amend the streets map to reflect that new main street, so that we're talking, the streets map is talking to what's happening in terms of this development on the ground. Next, please. Josh, so that's kind of, the overview of the requirements from in terms of the concepts, new concepts for the arterial and limited access streets. Josh is our subdivision administrator, and he's going to walk through those parts of the network that have to do with collector and local streets.
Good morning. So the process or the way that we get local and collector streets really isn't changing through the UDO. It would still be determined based on all the criteria that's in subdivision ordinance now. You may recall that last time we talked about streets being required for new subdivisions or new multiple building sites. One thing that we are looking at changing is that the state legislation changed chapter or the 160D, which gives us the authority to require streets, and it has expanded the eligibility of sites that streets could be required on from not just subdivisions, but could also be sites that have one principal use. The process wouldn't change, but the applicability could. Next slide, please. So collector streets and local streets are, for new development, are required whenever, collector streets could be determined when local streets required, but it meets other criteria. For instance, when a street intersects directly with a thoroughfare or goes through an area with a density greater than 1 or serves more than 125 residential units, then that street essentially provides a collector street function, and then a collector street may be required in lieu of that local street. Now we're going to go over kind of how streets are required and how we develop network. You can see these two sites. The northern site the area around it was developed prior to a subdivision ordinance that required network. And the southern site is really surrounded by development that provided for the opportunity to create network as the sites around them developed. Next slide, please. You can see that the site to the north and the area around it, there's really only 3 ways to get in and out. And there's a lot of cul-de-sacs that are throughout the development. And there's really not much we can do about connecting through. The site to the south provided for a great deal of stub streets that allow for future connections when development occurs. So when we start to look at how we create a network, we look at first the streets that surround a proposed development. And we extend those streets into the site in their natural path. Now they might change once they get into the site, but we first extend those streets into the site. Then once the streets extend in, we look at our preferred and maximum block lengths and connect the streets internal to the site to create that network. And you can see here that, we start at the edges and then we go through. And, there's times when we can't extend the streets, which would be when there's existing single family development. We don't stub to those lots because there's no future ability to connect those streets to anything. So to go into it a little bit more, we look at a site. This is more of a general situation, but we look at the site and determine if there's any of those future roads. We extend them into the site, and then we connect the roads internally. Next slide. Now, we start by measuring the project boundaries or the parcel boundaries for the project. And we measure those property boundaries and then divide by the preferred block spacing that the ordinance lays out. So for instance, if a project boundary was 1,000 feet and the preferred block spacing was 500, that would be 2 blocks or 1 street being required along that project boundary. We measure across odd property boundaries if there's a piece taken out, because the idea is to create an overall network for the area, not just taking into account one project boundary. This is our proposed preferred block length table. It's really a translation from our current preferred block lengths that were based on centers, corridors, and wedges. And it's a translation from centers, corridors, and wedges to our proposed place types. And it's not an exact translation, but it's as close as we feel like we can get. 2 or 3 changes that we really wanted to highlight was regional activity centers. The block spacing we think really needs to reduce a little bit down to 400 feet from 500 feet. We've heard manufacturing and logistics, maybe we need to adjust the block lengths, the preferred block lengths a little bit bigger. So we took them from 600 to 800. And then parks and preserves, we never really had a block spacing, but if there were a street required, the preferred would be 1,000 feet. So as we go through the development and look around the edges, we extend those streets internally and then connect them through, trying not to exceed the maximum block length. There's always things we need to take into account, whether that's topography or specific development criteria. And we try to do that as much as we can. Yes, once we set up the preferred block spacing for the area or for the external boundaries, then we look internal and we try not to exceed the maximum. This maximum block table is just like the preferred is a translation from centers, corridors, and wedges to the place types. And again, we've decreased the regional activity center by 50 feet for the maximum. We've increased the manufacturing and logistics to 1,500 because we've heard of larger buildings that need more spacing, and we've added a parks and preserves maximum. Now, no matter what site you look at, there's always a need for flexibility, whether there's rail or streams or freeways. We wouldn't never create blocks that stub to a freeway or a railroad that doesn't have a proposed connection over it. There's gas pipelines that interfere. So there's built-in flexibility that allows staff to work with steep slopes and wetlands and floodplains and all these things. If it's manufacturing and there's buildings that require maximum block lengths to be extended, then we have that flexibility that we can use to make sure that we can work with the development team to create the flexibility and the best network that we can. Are there questions?
Sorry, I apologize, everybody. I had one of those things where everybody started talking before I realized I was still muted. Thanks for that, Josh, as well as Tracy, you and your team. We have a couple of questions that I think we need to circle back to. And I think the first one that I'd like to circle back to and touch on was a question Dick Winters had about public versus private streets. Laura, I know you answered that, but also, Josh, if you could weigh in a little bit on how a determination is made from public versus private.
Unmuted. Generally, if there is a network required street, it's the preference is public, and there's always instances where maybe we may look at a private street, but in general, if it's network required or if it's needed for future network, it's required to be public, because that way we can ensure that those roads can be connected to.
Thank you for that, Josh. Not a question so much as a comment, Eric. I know you had questions as well, but you also had given us the comment that you think urban parks need to have a smaller block length. Just want to let you know we've received that feedback. Thank you for that. Following up on that, well, Nate, you had a question, but I think Laura has addressed that question. You had a couple questions, really. One about the 400-foot length for uptown block structure and affordability. So I think that addresses everything that there is in chat that had been commented or asked. Before we move on, would anybody like to raise your hand? Oh, Nate, perfect. Go ahead and unmute and ask your contribute, sir.
I was just doing some rough measurements. Uptown looks closer to 450 in some instances, but yeah, I guess the ordinance right now is it's a math calculation, and there's not a lot of context to actually what makes sense from a network perspective. And I think I wrote this in the comments, but roads are very expensive, very, very expensive. And I would guess that a very high percentage of roads are built by private development, which then translates those costs down to rents and housing costs and all that stuff. So I'd love for us to find a way. There's a few exemptions in the ordinance that Josh is very good at deciphering, but they're hard to qualify for. And a lot of times roads are built to a dead end that may never be extended. And so I hope we can get a little bit more creative and innovative with thinking about our connectivity. And everything I've heard as part of the comp plan and the UDO is about multimodal. And this seems like this is about building roads. And so have we considered pedestrian bike networks as counting for block structure, just other, it seems like this is the subdivision ordinance getting a little bit stricter. And so I wish we could find a way to pull this into more of a creative way where the network's grown for bike, ped, and traffic.
Thank you for that, Nate. Laura, I think you were raising your actual hand, if not your Zoom hand.
Well, I just based on what Nate said, I think any specific ideas you have would be much appreciated. Maybe we can have follow-up conversation on that. And from the affordable perspective, we are looking as we kind of work through the range of regulations to see, are there places where for a truly affordable project, we can look at relaxing some standards to make those projects work better, so that, something coming down the road, you kind of have to, and I think you've been one to point this out to us before, Nate, you need to see everything, but to look at what we could do without actually compromising the quality of that affordable project. So we don't want to do that as well. So something we're looking at bringing back to you guys in a couple of months.
Thank you, Laura. Walter, I think I had seen your hand go up.
Yeah, I was curious. I had posed a question early on when Ms. Newsom was talking about the street map. And my question was, where can one see this street map? Laura, I think you posted something that talked about the blue line, but I was talking about,
With me.
that it sounds like that CDOT has a street map, and I'm just wondering if we can see the street map.
So Walter, thanks for teasing out your question a little bit. And then I think it was Julian actually with the CDOT team that had responded with some commentary on the blue line. And I followed up on that as well with a link to the current iteration of the streets map and the blue line. With regard to the development of the streets map, I'm going to toss that question over to Tracy and the CDOT team for them to give a little bit more detail on.
Thank you.
Sure. And, we kind of introduced this concept last time as being the expansion of the concept of the streets map citywide. Obviously, it was rolled out as part of the TOD Blue Line and tied to the TOD ordinance regulations. We are developing the streets map that will reflect the entire city. Obviously, that is, or maybe not so obviously, but it's also tied to the establishment of place types, and it's really kind of the place type and the street type that's going to help define what the context is like, and kind of in some cases how the requirements are laid out. So that map is under development. There will be a process. We can talk more about this next time as well. There will be a process for when that's drafted to get it out to the public, to get people to walk them through it, and then to give them plenty of time to make comments on that as well, just like there was with the blue line version of the streets map.
Okay, so this would include the old corridor map, the collector street map that CDOT prepared a number of years ago, as well as all the new streets that would come from the expectations tied to each individual place type. Is that correct?
Well, what it'll have on it is the existing, it's information, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about that when we start back up here in a minute. But there'll be information about existing and potential future arterials, existing and potential future collectors. Local streets will not be on the streets map. Limited access roadways will be on the streets map. So yes, it will basically be a resource to go to get the information about the particular type of street.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Walter. Eric, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I have a couple of things. I'll just try to keep them concise. One is building off Nate's. I would love to also be part of that discussion. I agree 100% with his comments about the multimodal and focusing on that using this section of the UDO and the streets map as well to be able to convey where those networks are as well. Second piece is, I know that might not be what you would like to do, but if we can be involved in the process of the draft map before it gets out, like in terms of how it gets communicated, I think having neighborhoods and importantly the development community too, and how they're going to use that map. So we are not just getting shown the draft and then, you already put so much work into it, but maybe there could be a small group or one of these meetings where we kind of really dig into how that works. So you guys get feedback. So how it's displayed, classified, all of those things make sense and communicate what everybody is looking for in that map. It's just some of the feedback. And then one piece was on the desired bike block length. Since there doesn't seem to be minimums, but a desired and then a max, what is the flexibility with that desired? And I know Alan already answered my question about small parks, but when other areas, especially center place types, require maybe having that smaller block length, what is the flexibility with getting smaller block lengths, even when it comes to those desired or, so sorry, a lot there to unpack.
No, that's okay. Thanks for that, Eric. Josh, can you weigh in on Eric's flexibility question?
There really isn't a minimum. You know, if a development proposed smaller block lengths, we wouldn't necessarily say, no, you have to make them bigger. So I think we're open to being flexible about any type of smaller block length, just depending on the place type and where, you know, what the use is.
And I guess just any encouragement on maybe having smaller, I think, because I can't remember exactly what it was. I thought it was like, was it 600 and some, or maybe it was 500. I can't remember for centers. I think just encouraging smaller block lengths.
Depending on the center, I think
Maybe
they can be as small as 400. So,
right. Okay.
You know, it's fairly small.
So could there be maybe a range instead of just exact, you know, maybe saying between 400 and 600 or something like that. So, you know, it gives some flexibility.
In practice, we have them. It's not a, you have to do it's really, we don't want it bigger than the maximum, but somewhere in between the preferred and the maximum is what it ends up being.
Can we go back to that slide, Alan, for parks and preserves?
2 slides.
So this is based on just, and I think Kevin said this, but everyone knows this is based on the parks and preserves place type, which are, those are really going to be the very large parks and preserves, which, if I'm correct, Josh, are currently don't have to provide any street network, right?
That's correct.
So, but if this were a park that was in a regional activity center, for example, and it was really an urban park and a regional activity center, they're going to meet, for this proposal, they would meet that 400-foot block length. But you have like Reedy Creek Park would probably be a park and preserve, where right now there are no streets required to go through there. This is a new requirement to have some street network in those really large parks. I don't know if that helps or not, but just trying to say, follow up on what Kevin was saying, is some of the, you know, a number of our not so large parks are going to be in these other place types that do have the shorter block lengths.
Thank you, Laura. I want to circle back into the comments just a little bit and maybe call on David Walters. David, I know you had chimed in with regard to when we were speaking of, or when the commentary in the chat was speaking of smaller block lengths for, I think, urban parks. But you also followed up with a question regarding shared street design principles. If you want to, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Well, sure. I was in the middle of writing a more detailed thing, but I'll just give words to it. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I think it's becoming clear, you know, following on Nate's good point about there are other ways of moving around subdivisions or place types other than driving cars on streets, that we're likely to get a more complex network of connected public spaces, bike paths, footpaths, greenways, streets, etc. And other public spaces like urban squares. So it seems pretty clear that this more complex situation might need some finessing in terms of how that's coded. I mean, that's an obvious statement. I mean, the more complex system you're trying to code, the code tends to get more complicated. And I'm really just sort of trying to follow up so that the implications of Nate's point about having a variety of ways to move around transcends the simple geometry of block types, which I think is a very good point. I'm all in favor of connected streets and short blocks. That's how I've designed for decades. But our evolving situation is more complex than that. And the more we can do in this code to respond to that grow in complexity would be great.
Thank you, David. And I'll just follow up and say, you know, we hear your comments and we hear Nate's ideas, and Eric touched on them as well. And I do think that's valuable feedback. And certainly our team will take that and we'll digest that and see if maybe we can't incorporate some of those ideals and those principles and that feedback into our standards as we go forward. So thank you for that. Before we go on to the next question, I also just want to say, I know there was a lot of folks that have commented in chat that with regard to the development of the streets map, that a lot of you would like to be engaged. I'm not going to call it out individually, but we are recording the chat. So we are recognizing and recording your interest in being engaged in that streets map development process. Nate had a question with regard to block length and TOD, and I will admit I am not the TOD master, so I'm going to lean on one of my teammates, either Laura or Alan, to jump in on Nate's question.
I'll jump in. So the maximum TOD building length is 400 feet, and so if every block had to literally be center line to center line of street, 400 feet, then yes, Nate, I think we would have a challenge. But some blocks are longer, some blocks are shorter. And I think that we've been working, what we've actually been getting is a request for longer buildings because of the way blocks work and the way that Josh works with them. Sometimes there's not the ability to put a block every 400 feet, or something is designed so that, you know, a number of the blocks are longer than 400 and then some of them are shorter. So if you've got a specific situation where we're having problems with that, that would be helpful, but I think we do find a lot of blocks longer than that 400-foot length. And I think that, you know, the maximum building length is what it is in the ordinance or what the block would accommodate. Sometimes the block may not accommodate the maximum in the ordinance. And I've kind of talked in circles on that one.
Yeah, and maybe it's a study for you all to look into, but if you just look at the existing block lengths in our current activity centers, like South End, they're longer than 400 feet, but they feel very walkable, all of Camden Avenue. And so that would trigger a brand new street going through most blocks in South End. And I don't know if that's your intent, but putting a 70-foot, 80-foot wide street through every block in South End is not going to leave a lot of room for development. So maybe it's a different number, but 400 is going to trigger a lot of new streets in our existing activity centers.
I hear you, and Josh can probably respond to this better than I can. Actually, in the way that you run through that with your preferred exterior block length,
Nate, you would have to have an 800-foot block to trigger a new street. A project would have to be like twice the preferred before you would have a single street.
Gotcha. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Again, my comment's just more context oriented. Maybe you all thought through all that about the places we're trying to create and some of our existing conditions. So that makes sense.
I think our challenges, Nate, actually in the OAC members, because a lot of the blocks in an area like South End, you really are never hitting the threshold for a new street requirement with these standards. And how do we get some kind of permeability for those, you know, for the 750-foot long block? Which maybe goes along with some of that discussion of more ped bike access through blocks instead of always streets.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Josh. Eric, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. That's why I think, you know, if we had a classification of a street that was a pedestrian only street, which I know somebody responded back that all streets are designed for multimodal, but this is a case right there where if you had this street type, that would allow that to happen. So you don't have to put a street, and that may, disrupt the building, but allows those smaller block lengths to occur because you have a street that is that allows just for pedestrians, cyclists, whatever to go through. Could add that flexibility without disrupting the building or the architecture design, but allows connectivity to still be allowed.
Yeah, the rail trail is a great example, right? It's probably 30 feet of right of way and takes tens of thousands of people every month.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Great point. Again, seeing some continued interest to be included, to be engaged in the streets map development. We hear you, CDOT hears you. I think that largely catches us up at this point for the comments and questions in chat. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation back over to, once again, Tracy Newsome, transportation planner with CDOT, to run through our next section. Tracy?
Thanks, Kevin. We've spent some time giving an overview of key aspects of the requirements for new streets. Again, talking about existing streets next time, really focusing on new streets here. We've been focusing on new concepts for the most part. And then also thanks to Josh for walking through kind of what the process is and that hasn't really changed, if at all. So the next question is, well, what do these new streets look like? And what we wanted to be sure that everybody knew is kind of the ties between where you go to get standards and cross sections and more dimensional details about each of the different street types, because they're a little bit different. And the ties between the kind of the complementary pieces and the UDO language itself, thought it would be helpful to explain where these different pieces are found. So for limited access roadways, again, this is all a reminder. We're just kind of going back and reminding folks that these will be on the streets map. There won't be cross-section details for limited access roadways. So these are freeways. Again, these are freeways, interstates, expressways, those types of things. And they're, that's really kind of the NCDOT domain in terms of kind of the design of those. And so there would not be cross-section details, because in essence, these really don't function as streets per se. They're more traditional roadway, higher capacity roadways. Next slide, please. Arterials, the standards for new streets for arterials, as we've just described, will be on the streets map, which will be referenced in the UDO. On the streets map, very similar to how it's done with TOD and the TOD streets map now. So for those of you who are familiar with it or who want to go and familiarize themselves with it, you would find the location, you would find the cross-section, the recommended cross-section, the expected dimensions of that, and the future curb line location, which is important because that ties back to some of the zoning related items. So those dimensions will be found on the streets map. As I mentioned last time, there will be a little bit of a difference between where this is going and what's on the TOD blue line, in that the dimensions for the streetscape will also be shown on the streets map. We wanted to create a lot of clarity and get it kind of in one place moving forward. Next, please. The standards for new streets for collectors. Again, the collectors will be shown on the streets map, or they will be defined through meeting criteria laid out in the UDO, as Josh talked about earlier. So there's a couple different ways that something might kick into being a collector. If it's on the streets map, it'll show the location of the collector. It will not carry a lot of dimensional or cross-section information, because the appropriate place to get that will be in the Land Development Standards Manual. So it'll show up locationally on the streets map, and the actual standards themselves will be in the Land Development Standards Manual as they are now. Next, please. The local streets, and again, we, not necessarily going to need to go into a lot of detail on this, but just to kind of point people in the right direction. Local streets are not going to be shown on the streets map in most cases. There might be some local streets shown, just as there are on the blue line, some that have certain types of public paths or trails along them might be shown on the streets map, but most local streets will not be on the streets map. There are several types of local streets, just as there are now, and those the UDO will spell out the application or the applicability of each of those street types based on what kind of place you're in and certain conditions about the specific context that you're building in. And again, similar to the collectors, those cross sections will be found in the Land Development Standards Manual as they are now. So that won't change in terms of where you find the information. Next slide. This is really just a summary, just to kind of hammer home how the different ways of finding the information about the standards are, and it relates to the street type. Limited access is on the streets map, but with limited details. Arterials are on, basically you need to know where these are and which ones are defined as limited access. The arterials will have the most detail. They're on the streets map. They'll have the cross section, the streetscape, and that future curb line location all in one place so that it's easy to find out information about the arterials. The collectors cross sections, as they are now, will be in the Land Development Standards Manual. The local streets will have a portion in the UDO that defines which local street you use, and then the cross sections themselves and the standards and details are in the Land Development Standards Manual as they are now.
And excuse me, now I think it's me, so thank you for that, Tracy. I just wanted to touch base briefly on some of the principles and concepts for other infrastructure. And I know I touched on this at the beginning, that much of SSI is already infrastructure, but a lot of times when people hear infrastructure, we also, we immediately almost think of roads, bridges, and streets. And it is that, but it's much more than that. It's also the drainage in our streets, and also the water to our houses, and how our houses or how developments are connected to wastewater or sewer. With regard to all of this infrastructure, much of this is covered in our current subdivision ordinances, and we're very much carrying some of those principles and concepts forward. Some of them will be addressed in SSI. Drainage is something that has largely conceptually moved over to the natural resources chapter that Andrew also walked through with you a couple of meetings back. But drainage needs to be installed in accordance with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Design Manual and the Charlotte Land Development, Stormwater Design Manual and the Charlotte Land Development Standards Manual. And with regard to water supply and wastewater or sewer, there's kind of two avenues or two approaches. You could go with a public option or a private option. If you go the public option, you're talking about working with Charlotte Water, and you have to install that per their water and sewer design construction standards, city code, and state regulations. If a development were to offer the private option, then those systems are reviewed and approved by the applicable agencies or agency having jurisdiction. So those, again, are kind of principles that already exist that are just carrying forward as we develop our new UDO. So with that, we're coming towards the end of today's presentation. So we've got another opportunity to pause and have some comments or some questions and some discussion. I will say that in the chat, David Walters, thank you for continuing to provide additional feedback with regard to block lengths, especially in the South End area. I think the first question I see in chat that I don't think we've quite got to yet is Walter's question regarding the streets map and how it relates to the thoroughfare plan. If somebody, Tracy, you have something you can advise Walter on with that?
So the streets map in the requirements is essentially replacing the thoroughfare plan. So the streets map will be used because the thoroughfare plan in the past would show, the location and the classification. The streets map will show more information. It will show the location, the expected cross section, the future curb line. And so it will be replacing the thoroughfare plan.
Thank you for that, Tracy, and thanks, Walter, for the question. Nate, I know something that you've, an issue or a question that you've raised before with regard to private utilities in the public right-of-way. We hear you. It seems that that's probably beyond the scope of what we can tackle in the UDO. I think that's something that is a policy issue that we'd have to work and address with Charlotte Water, and that continues to be a challenge going forward. But we very much hear that concern and that question and that issue, Nate.
Yeah, I was bringing up more just innovative stormwater management and public right of way. That's also something that we haven't necessarily done. Rain gardens, underground stormwater treatment.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that touches on actually, I'm going to say something that I think Eric brought up when we touched on natural resources a while back, and that's a little bit of the green infrastructure. So we've heard that that idea and those suggestions, and I'll say we're committed and we have those in our pocket. I don't know that we'd be able to incorporate them for this iteration of the UDO, but it's something certainly that we're interested in exploring as we go forward and continue to tweak the UDO. Eric, you had a question with regard to the CLDSM update. You are right. It will have to be updated as the UDO and the comp plan probably incorporates standards that and very much relies on standards in the CLDSM. I think the CLDSM is currently going through a review for one of their most recent revisions. Other than that, I think I'll lean on Laura or Alan. They've probably got a better idea as to what the process for updating the CLDSM is like.
I think we can get back to you guys on that. That's handled by what formerly was the engineering department. It's a group that are now actually in Charlotte Water under stormwater, but the engineering function of that. So I'd like to get with Brendan Smith in that group and ask him what the process is. I know what the process is internally, but what the process is externally. I know, Nate, I'm not to put you on the spot, but I believe that those changes do come through DSTAC, the Development Services Technical Advisory Committee. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Laura, I admitted Brendan to the meeting just not long ago. So maybe if
Brendan's here, I didn't realize that.
If you're still here, maybe you can speak to what the process is for amending the Land Development Standards Manual.
Or Robbie, if Robbie's here. I saw him earlier too.
Yes, I'm here.
I'm here.
Not to put you guys on the spot, but here we are.
Hopefully, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, so just real quick, the Standards Committee is a committee formed of various city staff members from construction, CDOT, engineering, stormwater, urban forestry, city arborists. So we meet monthly and review proposed changes to the standards manual. And we try to keep it to 2 times a year at the most to do revisions, but I'm going to try and to reduce that now to just every July in the summer process a revision or update to the standards manual. And the public is involved in that through DSTAC. Like Laura mentioned, we always bring to DSTAC's attention that we have a revision to process and solicit feedback and comments from them. But also I post the draft changes to the standards manual on the website for the standards manual every time we do a revision for at least a month of public review and comment. So if you're not on it already, you can subscribe from the standards website. It's charlottenc.gov/CLDSM. There's a notify me thing on there where you can sign up and get emails when we do updates. And anytime we're open to proposed changes and revisions from the public, you can just email me or send it over to Stormwater and Engineering, and we'll bring that to the committee. But with changes for this UDO, we would definitely work hand in hand with the staff working on UDO as well as public comment for adopting any changes to the street standards, for example.
Great. We really appreciate you jumping in on the call, Brendan, but also giving and laying out that process. It was such a treat that I guess you joined just as we needed you. I'm not sure of the order of how this occurred, but Eric, I see your hand up. If you would wait just 1 second. Walter, you had posted a question in the chat, and I think this ties again back to the streets map. And there's the interest, and the question is, when will cross sections potentially be able to be seen with regard to the streets map?
So I want to make sure I understand what the question. Are you talking about specific cross sections for specific streets, or are you talking about, generally speaking, the types of cross sections?
I understood, Tracy, from what you just said a moment ago, that this new streets map would include the cross sections and more information than we would expect to normally see on a thoroughfare plan map. And we know what the existing thoroughfare dimensions are. They're part of the subdivision ordinance and so on and so forth. And so my question was, when this more detailed description of these street types and what they are composed of in terms of modality and different forms of access, when will we get to see those individual items, or will that actually evolve through some combination with place type mapping? I mean, for example, if you have four streets in hierarchy and you got street number 2, it would seem it needs to be fairly standard, even if it goes between one place type and another. But I wasn't clear on how that was going to be worked out in the place type mapping process relative to when it starts to become a component in the old Chapter 19 or in the subdivision ordinance or somewhere else where it's converted from policy into a standard. So when this map is coming down, I know Eric and several others have said, I want to be part of that process. When will that occur relative to this whole SSI discussion, please? Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of things to make sure that you're comfortable with or familiar with the way the information, the type of information that's going to be on the streets map. I would encourage you to go ahead and look at the blue line, visit the blue line streets map, look at that, look at the way the information is portrayed so that you, get a chance to see generally how the streets map is going to play out. In terms of the relationship between the development of the SSI chapter and the streets map and the place types mapping, the streets map really pretty much reflects a lot of the policy that has already been adopted. It'll be a matter of creating kind of, I'm going to use the term generic, and I don't mean to use it that way because it's not quite correct. It'll be very similar to the types of cross sections that you see on the TOD, the blue line streets map. Process wise, we will be, clearly what we're hearing is folks want to hear more about the details. They want to know more about how this gets put together. We did a little bit of that as part of the blue line when we went through this with the blue line. We'll do the same thing for the citywide map so that everybody understands the components, how they get built, how the cross sections evolve, what they are, and how they're portrayed. So we'll walk you, we'll find an opportunity to walk you through that because we did that before, and it sounds like a lot of people have interest in seeing something like that again. So we'll do that.
Okay. The fundamental question is, when will that occur?
It will occur in the same general time frame that we will be having the a public draft available for the SSI chapter and beginning the place type mapping process. So it'll be in probably the fall, late summer, early fall.
Okay.
And we can provide more information, some of that, more of that background information. I don't want to speak for Laura or this group, but we may pull a group together and make sure that we at least walk through that background so that everybody knows is reminded of how that development occurred with the blue line.
Okay,
And
so
there-
even though we're talking about it today, we're talking months and months away before we will have this document that we're referring to as the streets map.
And just so maybe to clarify a little bit, Walter, the streets map is something referred to in the UDO. There will be, just like the UDO, there will be a lot of time for discussion and input, because we know that we're giving you kind of high level concepts now, with the details later. What Tracy's given is the high level concept, and you can see how it works in TOD, and those details will come. It won't necessarily be through the OAC process, because that is a document outside of the UDO that the UDO points to, but there will be an engagement process to hear feedback, to look at potential adjustments to the streets map.
All right, now I'm confused. Did I just understand you to say, Laura, that this whole thing about the streets and street types and street map that we've been talking about will not be done by the OAC, is outside of the UDO process?
We have a number of documents that the UDO points to. The Land Development Standards Manual, we've talked about a number of stormwater manuals. The streets map is another one of those. And so that has not been, that's being developed by CDOT as a reference document to the UDO. And so that will be handled, the engagement and update on that will be handled. And so the UDO will point to that reference document. And I don't know, we probably have 10 or 15 other reference documents that we're pointing to that are going to be handled. There'll be plenty of opportunity to talk about input. And I don't know if Tracy and the team have more information on how going to get the input, but it is not within the UDO and the OAC process.
I don't understand why it wouldn't be. I thought one of our prime objectives for the UDO in the first place was to put everything in one spot, make it easy. But I'm done with talking about that. So thank you for your response.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Laura. Excuse me. Eric, thank you so much for your patience. I very much appreciate you waiting. Please, sir, feel free.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just listening to some of Walter's comments that they kind of intertwine with what just my point, making sure that these external non-UDO documents have the continuity, so they flow together, at least if they can't be. And correct me if I'm wrong on this question for you all. The reason why they're separated, it provides, and may not be the only reason, but one main reason is, does it provide more flexibility for updating them? Because it can be done by staff and not by a council approval or adoption or something like that. Is that one of the main reasons why some of these external documents are not being included in the UDO? And therefore, you know, my point about making sure that they have the input, and especially from the OAC, since we are so heavily involved in the UDO process, that we can carry that continuity over to those documents so they become a little bit more seamless.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Now, I was just going to say, I know that, you know, we've got Joanna and Felix and Julian and Tracy on, and there was a process that was used for the blue line. I assume that you're going to follow that process. Is it possible, or something similar to that? Is it possible to discuss how you're planning on handling it?
Yeah, a couple of comments just to kind of wrap back around. The streets map will be adopted, just as the blue line streets map was. You know, so there will be, you know, an amendment process as well for the streets map. So that is an adopted document. Just want to make that clear, just as the blue line was. So when we talk about the UDO's got a reference to the streets map, that's the same. You can go and look at the way the TOD ordinance was done, and it referenced the streets map. And so it's a very similar type of, you know, that's not going to be very different. The process, and And so you can imagine that going from the blue line streets map to a citywide streets map, and in particular, a city of 300 and something square miles with a lot of different contexts in it, you know, it's a complicated, large undertaking. We are going to use a very similar type of process. We are using input, and we can explain all that. We can have a process where we will get with whoever we wants us to, and we'll explain the process of going through. But what we will be doing is very similar to what we did before. There will be a long period of time where we will have an interactive version of this map. The streets map is a digital streets map. There will be an interactive version. We will have a process where we provide some introductory information to folks about that. We point them to the streets map. We collect comments on the streets maps interactively in the digital format. We will be, what we did with the TOD ordinance is we worked with, as planning was going out and describing some of the zoning alignment, for example, we were out with them describing the streets map, answering questions about the streets map, and pointing people to the streets map. And so we will be, you know, as the city is developing the place type map, we will be also going out and kind of in the same time frame, using a lot of the same formats and a lot of the same fora. We'll be going out and getting information, both providing information and background information to folks and collecting information during those meetings as well.
Thank you for that, Tracy. And I just wanted to circle back briefly to Eric's question, because I feel like that's half an answer, Eric. I was getting ready to say the streets map is a little bit a different animal than some of those other things that you were talking about were with regard to some of those other documents that are more of kind of guideline documents. Yes, you're correct. One of the express reasons that we point to those other documents, they do live outside the ordinance environment. And it does provide and offer staff the availability to go in and tweak something for needed flexibility if we're finding that something isn't working the way that we intend or as it should or is optimal for the community. So yes. Want to circle back. I think there's a couple of folks that had commentary on trying to get a better understanding or better clarity of how kind of everything comes together at this point with regard to timing of the streets map and the UDO. And I see Laura's, you know, a lot of the uncertainty to this point really was dictated to a certain extent by how the comp plan process has played out. And now that we do have the comp plan that's been adopted, as Laura has said, we can glean a little bit more clarity with regard to our process going forward. So we hear what you guys are saying, and we'll very much try to put together and flesh out a little bit of a better timeline or expected timeline for somehow of these other pieces of the puzzle really come together and pull together. I also wanted to circle back and say, Matt Langston, I did see your comment with regard to the cross sections in the Charlotte Water. Thank you for that, sir. I think that's an important piece of feedback. I think that largely catches us up with comments and questions in the chat. Did anybody else have something that they wanted to address before we start to head to wind down our meeting today?
Kevin, I had two quick things. One, I also want to say thank you to Matt. I think you have been the one who's brought forward some of the potential conflicts with waterline in a number of situations. We have it as we're working on developing language for the UDO. We're trying to take that into account. I'm not going to guarantee that we caught all of it. So I think when everyone can see everything together, including us, because we really, at this point, you know, we're still looking at bits and pieces and trying to pull things together. I think there may be more places where you can say, hey, that we have a problem with this. This doesn't work with this. So I just want to recognize that we're trying to, as we're hearing that kind of feedback, say, oh, well, I mean, I think at one meeting, we talked about build 2 lines, and maybe depending on the water easements, that wasn't all going to work. So we've tried to build that flexibility in, but again, probably we'll have more opportunities for doing that. But the other thing I wanted to just follow up on is there was a lot of chat kind of mid-meeting about, do all streets have to be vehicular streets, or do they have to be designed in kind of a traditional vehicular traditionally with bikes and peds separated from vehicles. So I think we'd be interested in having continuing discussion about that. It's challenging. I think we have places where we would like to actually see the non-vehicular connections to build network that is maybe a little bit more cost effective, where we're not seeing that we're going to get streets. And on the flip side, what I'm hearing from a number of folks is we'd like to see, in some cases, do you need a full traditional street with curb and gutter and sidewalk and so forth? Is there another way to handle streets in some conditions? So what I would ask is, if you're interested in being part of follow-up conversation on that, if you could just email Alan after this so that we can have that conversation. See if we can make any progress in that respect. That's all I have. Thank you. It's been a really good conversation today. We appreciate everyone's input.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you, Laura. And just to piggyback on what Laura had just said, Alan has dropped his email address in the chat. So for those of you who are interested in having that follow-up conversation and seeing if we can't flesh out concepts for that approach, feel free to email him at that address. That takes us to towards the end of the meeting for today. As far as next steps, our next meeting will be on July 8th, and that will be, again, regarding SSI Part 3. And then also coming after that meeting, look forward to, as we have for all of our different chapters to this point, reach out to you with a feedback survey to get some additional input and feedback on some of the concepts that we are exploring as part of the SSI chapter of the UDO. And with that, I will kick it over to Allison to close us out.
Thanks, everybody. Great discussion today. I really appreciate your feedback, and certainly will follow up with those that are interested in diving deeper into the streets map world. So thank you for your participation, and please remember that when staff sends out the survey asking for feedback, that's where you'll get a formal response if you submit something. So please take the time to provide us your thoughts. I know it's a lot to digest, and so feedback after the meeting is also very much welcome. So I don't know, Tony, if you have any last words, but with that, I'll say that I'll see you for the 3rd chapter here shortly.
No,
Tony, do you have anything?
Just thanks everybody for your engagement and continuing hard work on this. It's going to bear fruit. It already is. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.